Picture the scene. You're at home watching a video essay. Maybe doodling, maybe playing a game to keep your hands busy. Whatever it is you tend to do. It's an average day and you've got nowhere to be. It's a little windy out, but nothing exceptional. Then your phone sends you a very loud, insistent alert. Your TV switches on. You hear people shouting outside, sirens in the distance. Something is very wrong. It's doomsday, and you have to survive the next few hours, days, weeks, months, even years. What do you do? Part 1. A romantic apocalypse.
How is it that you're never scared?
Who says that I'm not?
When I say the words doomsday preparation, what comes to mind? Disaster, probably. Shoving food, water, and clothes in a bag. Maybe you've got a bug-out bag ready to go. Gathering your loved ones and diving down into a heavy bunker lined with cans, or heading for the hills to camp out in the wilds, never staying in one place too long. If I say doomsday prepper though, you'll probably have a different image spring to mind. Probably someone who stockpiles food, has lots of survival books to use as mats for their tins of beans, and, if they're American, the owner of many, many guns.
Every gun in this house is loaded.
There's a romanticism to survival, thinking that you could make it on your own. Gotta pull yourself up by your bootstraps and master nature. You know, be a survivor. That's part of the allure of survival crafting games, I think. You gather resources, build or find shelter, and over time you'll build everything up to something worth living in, worth loving. You get to craft a home, not just a shelter, and you can make it exactly as you choose, maybe even keep some cute chickens or pigs too. Plant a pretty garden, as well as growing your own food, making your own little Eden. The fantasy is, of course, that you don't actually have to know how to make those things. You just get a crafting menu and cobble together a weapon, a torch, a barricade, pop the things in the box and boom, you have an axe. You don't need to be able to really fight or run or climb. You don't need the strength and dexterity and knowledge to turn junk into something useful, and there's always enough stuff there in the first place, either refreshing for you to refine and exercise your creativity with, or giving you a procedurally generated world so large that you'll never run out of materials. The game does it for you, and that's the appeal. You can get right to the good stuff, finding resources, exploring, defending yourself, and trying to make your home a safer place. And this isn't a bad thing either. Like, I'm not saying that if you enjoy playing survival games, you're a naive loser who would wilt at the idea of true outdoorsmanship. That's just me. There are too many bugs, and I get sad if I can't have a nice hot shower, you know? But these are games. They're meant to be fun. People love a good puzzle, and we love the challenges of optimizing your base and resource management, and figuring out the best ways to survive is really engaging. And besides, who doesn't enjoy feeling in control of their situation? Even though these games can act as a power fantasy, they can also be a really chill way to relax and sink into a world. Like Stardew Valley, where everyone's friendly and there's always something for you to do, but without the pressure. Go explore the forest, go fishing, plant crops and flowers, hunt for herbs, make friends with the cute little local spirits, and overthrow the corporation wanting to sink its teeth into the community. Whenever, however you choose. It's just a thoroughly nice game. But part of the fun of games and stories is that we can let our character be powerful for us, and all you need is the skill and sense to use it properly. You just put a few more points into stealth, and before you know it, you're an invisible ghost, backstabbing clueless enemies and stealing pretzels. Some survival games are significantly more sinister though, and those tend to be the ones I gravitate to, which is probably no surprise to anyone who's seen literally any of my content. Darkwood consumed 2 weeks of my life, and I played it pretty much non-stop. I can't recommend it enough. Then, when I started a new game to get more footage for this script, it drew me lovingly back into its maw, and I have no regrets. It positions you in that sort of typical man versus nature structure, but the thing is, the more you let nature in, the more that nature accepts you. The game might be after an apocalypse, but it's hard to tell how far that apocalypse has spread. It seems to mostly be contained to one zone, but that zone is rapidly expanding. It lives and breathes Slavic folklore, with your main trader being an amoral big bad wolf, carrying a sniper rifle, and there are a plethora of peculiar locals who have grown into the forest. And I mean that literally, as most folks you meet have physically changed to grow closer to the land, as the zone is defined by huge shadowy trees and fungi coating the floor in pulsing, poisonous webs. I love it. Some of this fungi is safe to touch though, and you can cook it down to its essence in your hideout, then inject it into your veins to mutate you closer to the forest. Initially, the woods treat you as a foreign body, an invader or parasite. All of the creatures living there go right for the throat, and items are few and far between. But as you mutate yourself into something that more closely shares the DNA of the woods, you experience visions that can help you later down the line and gain skills to help you survive. For example, one of the earliest skills you can get is to pinpoint exactly where you are on your map once per day. You don't have full information here. You're just a guy, dressed in the clothes of a scarecrow you happen to find, wandering around the woods and holing up at night when the danger's most potent, with the mysterious gas from your oven offering a sliver of safety against the monsters hunting you down. Your map is a rough sketch of whatever landmarks you can find. It shows where you are when you're next to one of them, because you can see it and orient yourself. But if you're between known points, well, you're gonna have to rely on memory. But you can tap into that connection with the forest once a day and feel where you are. It hurts you, but you can suddenly just know. And it pays to explore thoroughly and efficiently, because you'll quickly pick through the first area and run out of loot, because this area is abandoned. Nobody's making anything new or refilling the empty houses by going to the grocery store. And each night the creatures outside get increasingly aggressive, and after the first few nights you just kind of have to accept that something will get in, however you barricade your house. You'll be able to set traps to damage them, or be well armed enough to deal with them once they're in, but you're really not meant to feel powerful at night. You do the best with what you found, and it's rarely enough. I love the way the view of the screen emphasises this as well, because it's a top-down game, so you'd expect that you'd be able to see everything around you, right? Nope. You have a vision cone, so if something is too far left or right of you, or is creeping up behind you, then you can't see it. It constantly puts you on edge, as the music is very understated, and there's often sound cues as to when a monster's nearby. Heck, even just a regular deer will mess you up, let alone a hungry, mutated dog riddled with fungi that regards you as an intruder. This is excellently executed at night, because the main puzzle is how to fortify your hideout, and the atmosphere is electric. If you stray a little too far from your hideout, and the oven's protective gas, then the floor gore will kill you in seconds, so yeah, you have to be back by sundown, which is another compelling reason to pay attention to and learn your surroundings. And you'll start without any way to tell the time either, so you have to pay attention to the light levels to clue you into how late it's getting. If you get lost and take too much time to get home, then you're compost. Again, at night, your vision's obscured because, naturally, you can only be in one room at a time, so there's walls blocking your view. You can't see the things slamming themselves against your barricades, but you can hear them. When you're out and about, hearing that twig snap might just save your life, but it also instills a powerful sense of paranoia in the player that can get you into even more trouble if you run blindly into a poisonous mushroom, bear trap, or alert enemies that really are there by your footsteps. This game's sound design is incredible, but it truly shines at night when you're straining your ears for any warning signs that your new home's been compromised. One of the first nights I ever played through, I'd pushed a chest of drawers up against the door to the room I was hiding in, but something slammed against it over and over. I couldn't see the creature, but I could see the door and the dresser edging slowly forward with every deafening thud until the door was easily passed through. There was scrabbling and uneven, off-kilter footfalls. Something just unfamiliar enough that I couldn't place what might be making them, but my imagination was inventing full tilt. But nothing came in. I could hear it moving around in the next room, obviously unaware of where I was, but you can bet my heart was pounding out of my chest until dawn mercifully broke. I put a lot more resources into bear traps from then on. That's why these stories are fun, because they either give you memorable plots, rewarding scavenging mechanics and a feeling of control, or create fun personal stories through your actions to attach to, like I just described. And even when you do start out one of these games feeling weak and vulnerable, once you get the hang of the mechanics and learn how to manage your resources and head further into the depths of the world, you'll start to feel more competent, confident, and therefore, powerful. This is true for Darkwood, as even though most of the experience is designed to be tense and always keep you off guard, by the time I hit the final area, I had more items than I knew what to do with. Even with my bigger pack, I couldn't carry them all and was having to leave things in little caches for myself, and half of them I didn't even bother to return for. I had mastered the woods, and the woods had become my master. Narratively, my character had become a part of them now, and though your goal is still to get home, it felt like the forest provided everything I needed, and I knew from other people's reactions to me that physically, I would no longer be welcome in the city. That's what happens when you inject simmered fungal goo, I guess. There's another genre of post-apocalypse game too, where you're the equivalent of an adventurer exploring the often fictional world that came before you, sometimes discovering how and why it fell into ruin. These are exactly the kind of stories I'm talking about. They take away the puzzle and give you a sense of awe and discovery. Sure, there's probably a core gameplay loop based around combat, but that's not what the game is about. That's just the vessel you use to get there. Now, let's take a step away from games towards other story mediums like TV, film, and novels. In these stories, it's fun to watch characters we've grown to care about solve these exact problems, and go on similar journeys to the ones we go on in games. We get to live vicariously through them as they experience their own stories, with no input needed by us. Sure, the world might be a little bit more cruel to those characters, because it doesn't need to feel fair to a player, but there's always that question of how do they fix this problem? How are they going to get out of this when they just made a sound and the monster's coming? What clues is the narrative given us? What skills, tools, or blind luck might save them? That being said, not everyone dreams of surviving in the wilderness because, quite honestly, they probably can't even tell an oak from a beech tree and wouldn't have the first clue how to skin a deer. Having the trappings of a familiar world around you and thinking how you'd adapt to use it to survive is the exact same appeal. Exploration, finding resources, defending yourself. It's a fun thought experiment, looking around the room you're in now and seeing how you could repurpose what's around you. Sometimes it's a fantasy world, where things are just similar enough that you can run through the same process without feeling crushing despair or anxiety. And in pop culture, the modern apocalypse is an exceptionally romantic idea. It's not dropping you into the unfamiliar, it's the world you know and are intimately familiar with for you to take advantage of, with less rules to control your behaviour, and more chaos to excuse it. Society is broken down, and you have to survive, but this time it's with a familiar backdrop which automatically gives you an advantage. It's easier not to think about the less glamorous parts of survival, like eating a can of clam chowder for the 25th meal in a row because that's the untouched pallet you found in a warehouse earlier this month. But you imagine yourself as powerful, fending off hordes of zombies or fellow survivors with your trusty rifle and crowbar. A lot of the more modern urban survivalists I've seen over the past few years have focused on offensive defense. We've become obsessed with the romantic idea of an apocalypse, from The Last of Us to Fallout to Mad Max and A Quiet Place. For many people, they're a power fantasy, a fun creative exercise at best. The apocalypse itself is usually just the introduction in most of these stories, with the real story centering around surviving in the shell of our former world, the core of our reality rotting and collapsing in on itself. These survivors live off scraps. They're nomadic scavengers, living off the carcass of the world that came before, and moving to the next place when their loot runs out. But I always wonder what the plan is supposed to be when that easy loot runs out. You can wander across to the next town if it's not locked down by survivors, and pick through the carcass of department stores and supermarkets, but tins run out, or at least have some kind of a shelf life. Unlike with real nomadic cultures, the world doesn't recover when they move on. Once it's gone, it's gone. Fabric rots, buildings become unsafe without maintenance, electronics break down naturally or due to planned obsolescence. Inevitably, knowledge is lost. Part 2. Dark Ages.
You can't just fork it into your head. Learning has to be digested. You don't just have to know, you have to comprehend.
What skills do you have? If your shirt got a hole in it, could you patch it? Could you alter the fit? Sew a new one that fits you? And once you've gotten the hang of that, well, you're gonna run out of old things eventually. Later down the line, decades later, mind you, do you know how to spin thread, weave fabric? I only have the vaguest idea. Once society starts building itself up again, someone is going to need to know not just how to make things, but also how to make, gather, or fashion the materials in order to make those things. And since there's no crafting menu in real life, you'll also need the skill and techniques to manipulate those materials and tools to make something you need. If the initial surviving generation builds its new world out of scraps and has no time to develop or lacks the skills to pass on to their children, how do their children grow up and provide for themselves in the long run? Industrialization has had a major impact in skill degradation these days. When women entered the workforce, a lot of domestic skills and recipes were lost. As time went on, parents stopped teaching their children things like DIY and other practical skills. Some people leave home not even knowing how to chop an onion or work a washing machine. What are they going to do when the world ends? Before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, very few people had ever made a loaf of bread at home, and baking was seen as a granny-ish hobby for a while, before becoming trendy again. But once we were given the time and recipe blueprints, it became a huge craze to make something from scratch. It's grounding to work with your hands, and feels rewarding to eat something you made, or wear a sock you knitted. It's the only one like it in the whole world. People were putting their own twists on the simple bread recipes as their skills developed and confidence grew, slashing it decoratively or adding different flavourings and fillings, braiding it, shaping it, and getting different crumb spreads. Bread is just one of those things that almost every culture figures out sooner or later and has their own blueprint for. From arepa to zopf, bread says, I am settled, I am home. I no longer need to move around to hunt and gather, I can provide and feed my family. I have enough. That's the whole point of the agricultural revolution 12,000 years ago. Suddenly, we didn't have to move, and we had surplus food, which meant people could specialise. And for better or worse, we got civilization as we know it. Our daily bread is a staple we've relied on for centuries, and so many cultures regard a meal not just as a time to eat, but as a time to gather and share both food and stories. It's incredibly social. Even the English word meal means finely ground grain. It's baked into our language so deeply that we don't even think about it, as surely as in other languages their staple farmed carbohydrate is their word for meal. Gohan can be used to mean both rice and meal in Japanese, and the two are also used interchangeably in Korean. In several languages, including Korean and Chinese, common greetings are often translated as "How are you?" but literally translate as "Have you eaten?" But if these recipes, techniques, and skills don't get passed down, how do you expect someone to learn how to make bread, let alone grow and process wheat and rye? Right now we can just Google it, but if everything collapses and your online reference library is gone, then what? Even paper decays. A Dark Age is a period of history where a civilization declined, and there's huge loss of information and very few records. Every so often in our history we have a blank spot, a collapse. We've lived through several Dark Ages, where we've very few records or writing left, despite having a rich history on record before then. But why does that happen? Disaster, disease, invasion. There are myriad reasons, but most of them end up as theories because the thing about a Dark Age is that, well, it's a Dark Age. The lack of information kind of defines it. I've been reading about the Bronze Age collapse in the Mediterranean, and the fragments we have about it are largely scattered clay tablets that were meant to be temporary and reused, but were unintentionally preserved as the cities burned. The clay baked and recorded the messages left behind. There's a big problem in archiving right now, which is figuring out how we can make things last. How can we preserve a record, our history, our culture? And what's more, how can we make sure that the language and symbolism to even understand those archives aren't lost? A lot of ancient Greek and Roman culture that we're still aware of is largely thanks to references to their own pop culture in the scant collections of plays we still have. They were referenced enough that we sometimes have their names or subject matters, but not much else, because the audience of the time wouldn't have needed any detail. Think about how much of our comedy comes from references to other media, or being aware of common tropes.
Although if you come to see me first thing in the morning, wear dark glasses. Because before my face falls into place, I look frighteningly like Bernard Manning.
It's the same with common recipes. The mixture for concrete in ancient Rome specified the ratio of solids to water, but didn't specify seawater because, well, everyone knows you need the salt in the seawater to make it strong, and we have easy access to it, so why would you need to write it down? It took decades for historians to work out why the concrete they made to the exact same specifications kept crumbling, despite the ruins of the ancient Roman world still standing strong. That common knowledge wasn't common anymore. And if you think that's ridiculous not to specify, how many cake recipes do you know that tell you to use chicken eggs? Though we have online records now, finding a website that was popular only 10 years ago can be virtually impossible, with maybe a few fragments of the most well-known pages on the Wayback Machine. We see it even more commonly with video game preservation, where consoles move between generations increasingly quickly and often aren't backwards compatible within more than one gen, if that. What happens to exclusives to a streaming service like Netflix when it goes under? Suddenly finding a less official way to get a copy on your hard drive doesn't sound unreasonable. We're hemorrhaging stories and culture at an alarming rate. There's practical problems too, such as with radioactive waste disposal, where technicians aren't sure how to signpost that this area is dangerous. If there was some cataclysmic event that left an area uninhabited, how do you mark that this area is dangerous and will kill you? Is simply a red X enough, or maybe that marks the spot for forbidden treasure? Unfortunately, life is not a video game, so when we're looking at the remains of the Bronze Age collapse, there's no helpful little clay tablet diaries about people's political opinions or teen crushes. Shame. But we know how much trade and commerce must have been going on because of tablets recording orders, receipts, and complaints. We know from fragments of tools and buildings that there were advanced metalworking techniques beyond our understanding. There was large-scale production, hot running water, and sewage systems for every home. We've even found the names of cities that aren't on any maps and had no reason to be obfuscated, all because they're written down in shipping orders. For example, we managed to find the massively powerful trade centre of Ugarit because a farmer accidentally stumbled onto a tomb marker. It was a lost city with no record of it, but the more we dug, the more we found. Entire languages have been lost. And like I said, there's plenty of theories about why this particular Dark Age happened, but a lot of them contradict each other. Was it a volcano exploding and the widespread ash causing famine? Was it invaders with new iron weapons thanks to technological advances? Was it a drought, plague, population growth? We don't know for sure, but a lot of these reasons contradict each other because of the theorized timings. But honestly, that really goes to show that humans can bounce back from pretty much anything. We've rebuilt and reinvented ourselves more times than we can even record. It might take longer than we'd like, but we're always building and rebuilding, adapting our knowledge and inventing new ways to live. Even in modern times, colonialism and more has lost us so much knowledge. The African continent used to be rich in food and native crops until the conquest of Africa, but now those recipes are gone. The crops are extinct thanks to colonizers preferring to grow quick-yielding crops to feed a larger population, with themselves and the captured natives. So even the seeds of a lot of native plants are gone. The knowledge is lost. In 2018, a fire at the Rio de Janeiro National Museum destroyed some 20 million artifacts, including wiping out all knowledge of entire indigenous cultures, languages, and histories. That fire has even been likened to the burning of the Library of Alexandria. My point is that this isn't some vague hypothetical. This is a problem that has happened in the past and happens today.
Yeah, like that's ever gonna happen.
People don't just forget how to farm, craft, read, or write. People get displaced and have to flee burning, sickened, or disaster-ravaged cities, and sometimes have to abandon everything and start over again with no template. And of course, no matter how active and curious you are, you can't know everything, or even be good at everything. Groups work better because you can all specialise in your own skills. You'll want a first aider, a hunter and trapper, a gatherer, a tailor, a cook. Spreading that work out means you can all live easier, and you've also got other people to, talk to and bond with. Circling back to apocalypse media, there's always fun discussion between friends figuring out what you do in a zombie apocalypse. Lots of people say they'd hit the streets and raise hell, go full purge and loot and riot. Others say they'll hide out and go it alone, not trusting any strangers. Fill the bathtub with water and destroy the stairs when the undead come knocking, and that's great for maybe a week or two tops, but then what? What would you do, dear viewer? Part 3. Taking the long road.
Death is only the end if you assume the story is about you.
Humans aren't great at long-term problems. We like to be able to solve what's in front of us, and we're good at it. There are few things more satisfying than solving a puzzle you've been stuck on. Thing is, we're small creatures that live small lives, living day to day and moment to moment, and while we know big things like climate change are an issue, because there's nothing meaningful we can do individually that creates a visible impact, after a while your brain just kind of slides off it. Yep, that's a problem, but what can you do? After a while, your emotional response to it dulls too, and that's not a bug, it's a feature. Driving yourself mad with all of the things worldwide that you can't control is no way to live. But these larger issues are still a problem that we need to work on collectively, so we need to find some way, any way, to make people connect to it, to make it feel real, like an issue that affects us, rather than a vague, abstract doom that it's more comfortable to forget. I think this is why I see a lot of people arguing for the children, providing for our future generations.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
It takes it out of the abstract and into an emotional investment to care about long term, because we can see children around us every day. Maybe you have one yourself. It gives us something tangible to hold on to and care about. It makes us feel something. On the other hand, nihilism is a philosophical school of thought that tells us that we are nothing. There is no purpose to our existence. There is no purpose to our lives. We are specks of carbon in the vast nothingness of space, and that we're inconsequential. Nothing we do has any meaning, and if you died today, the universe wouldn't even notice. The logical conclusion of this train of thought is that there's no point continuing, even in a non-apocalyptic world. It's all meaningless. But the thing is, even if this is true in a cosmic sense, that doesn't really matter. Why should you have to matter in the grand scheme of the universe? Who cares? You don't exist on a grand scale, so adjust your perspective to the scale of your life. Look at what's around you now. What do you actually care about? There's a lot of power in choosing hope. You're still alive now, and you've found meaning in your life up to this point, even if it's just in feeding the neighborhood cats. My first ever video on this channel was actually about overcoming the hopelessness that accompanies depression, and while the quality's not the best because it was my first video, I stand by everything I said, so I recommend checking it out. In that video, I talk about the cat lady, and how our main character finds a reason to live in her best friend, and builds a whole community because of it, which is kind of beautiful. There's a pretty high chance that you have at least one meaningful relationship in your life, whether that's with another person, in real life or online, or with a pet. Hell, you can live for your houseplant, for the next episode of your favourite show, for finally completing your Pokédex. Anything that matters personally to you matters, full stop. I remember seeing a green text going around online where someone consumed by apathy turned their life around purely because of some shrimp. They were suicidally depressed with no social connections, but their uncle gave them some shrimp, which they tossed in a tank, but they all died thanks to lack of care. That was the thing that made this person sit up and go, "Oh God, these creatures died because of me," and, I quote, "I should take responsibility for once in my life." That change led to a snowball of improvement. They learned to take care of them properly and became invested and interested in the shrimp. They got a job to get money for better pet care, which led to them becoming more motivated to work and study to get even better work. Their parents could see they were happier, which made them happy in turn, so their relationship massively improved, and they connected over that interest, even if their parents weren't really interested in shrimp. They just loved their kid. Their mom even made them a shrimp cake for their birthday. Their interests grew in friends when they eventually did make it to college. What I'm saying is, go out and find your shrimp. The massively acclaimed novel, The Road, by Cormac McCarthy, relies on the dynamic of an unnamed man and shrimp, son, traipsing through an apocalyptic wasteland, and that familial relationship is what drives the book forward. The boy is everything to the man. His survival makes life worth it, even in dire circumstances. We're hardy creatures that can tough our way through a lot more than you'd expect, but the mind is often the thing that gives out first. Without the will to go on and something to live for, the body can simply give up. If you've ever heard anything about the book or watched the 2009 film adaptation, then the first thing that springs to mind is probably the word bleak. It's a bleak, grey, empty world covered in ash and waste. The film's colour palette is dull greys and drab blacks. The book has next to no punctuation. Everything in this world has been stripped bare. There's nothing left. The boy and man don't talk much, and when they do, it's often the same few worries repeated over and over. And yet, the book's core theme is hope. We need to find hope for something, anything, and the man finds that in the boy. He calls it the flame and the light, saying that the boy needs to carry it inside him and never let it go out. His hope in the future is his son's survival, and by hell or high water, he's going to make sure this kid survives him. He doesn't have many skills to pass on, and there's barely anyone left making anything new, only picking over an already long-stripped skeleton of a world. Even if this boy survives, in the end there's going to be nothing for him to inherit. Nothing tangible, no way of living, only surviving. He has been consigned to an inevitable rot of body and soul. Except that no, the boy still has hope. There's a sort of dance between faith in the future and cynicism from their undeniable situation throughout the story, as the boy has moved beyond merely picking through the rubble and scavenging for scraps. He needs reassurance that they're the good guys. He's trying to take that next step into sifting morals from the ashes of the world with the innocence a child has, trying to learn how his actions affect others despite being largely disconnected from them, and being taught that strangers are dangerous. His father says that this is what the good guys do. They keep trying. They don't give up, making their lives into a story, a journey. And the son is very concerned about being good, even though there's nobody else around to judge them. Of the 30 conversations the pair have throughout the book, 12 of them reference the differences between themselves and the elusive bogeymen of the bad guys, whilst another 14 focus on death, the rest being survival-orientated. There's this anxiety between survival and goodness. How far should they take matters in order to survive, and whether a world built out of harsh intent is worth surviving in? We're social creatures, after all, built to connect. Of course we care about morality. And even though the world around them is a bleached carcass of itself, there's still the drive to discover and find joy. Partway through, they find a flare gun, but when the father explains what it is, he's suddenly hit with the weight that there really isn't anyone left to signal to, so he decides they should keep it as a weapon to fire at any stranger that approaches them. Shoot first, keep the boy safe, survive. But the boy, the representation of hope, asks if they could use it like a firework instead, like a celebration. He's heard about them, but he's never seen things like fireworks or been at a party. His wish is refused because the father knows that might draw more people to them, but there's an innocence in it, in finding wonder in the wreckage. He even thanks the absent people in a bunker he finds for leaving their food, even though he knows it wasn't there for him specifically. The boy doesn't just consume, he thinks about who once prepared this and why. I just really like that. And the world doesn't go quite as dark as you'd think from what I've just said during a dark age. Given the way a lot of disaster apocalypse movies are, I'd not really questioned that society will just go back to no-tech or very low-tech for a couple of generations, but, like I said, people don't just forget. You don't just abandon your city thanks to a nuclear disaster or zombie plague, and simultaneously forget what a battery is or how a light bulb works. You can build batteries fairly easily out of coins. You probably did it in science lessons at school. Cars are going to be a thing you can use for a while, but don't expect a full Mad Max gasoline-fueled mutant gang. Gas doesn't store well at all, and it'll start to separate into layers pretty quickly, even when you store it carefully. It's got maybe 6 months at best if sealed properly to prevent oxidation, and at the correct temperature. Not a long time to find and refine some crude oil, even if you can safely run an oil plant. And I mean, while you could use old gas temporarily, you're probably going to gum up your engine with residue or corrode the inside of your vehicle. But bicycles are a thing. So are horse-drawn carts. We've known about them for centuries, and if you want to settle somewhere, you're probably not going to need that much transport if you bring all your scavenged goodies back home and basically live inside your spare part sanctuary. And I bring up the gas storage because the image of a wasteland populated by a leather-clad BDSM convention is pretty cliché at this point in post-apocalypse movies. And I'm not complaining, they look cool as fuck. But in Mad Max Fury Road, there's a perfect illustration of resources versus skill. Immortan Joe rules the roost because he controls the water supply in the desert, distributing it like a feudal king and allotting it by rank. If you're at the bottom of the pile, you're just gonna have to hold up a pot and hope you get a splash when it trickles down to the masses for a brief moment.
Do not, my friends, become addicted to water. It will take hold of you, and you will resent its absence.
Joe has power because he has resources, and that's often going to be the case for valuable items like fuel, food, and water. But can he maintain them? Can he sustain the water supply and keep it clean and safe to drink? Can he fix a pipe if it bursts? He's been lucky in finding an aquifer and has been smart to set up his base there, knowing he has the forces necessary to defend it from anyone who'd want to commandeer it, as he did canonically have to oust the people who used to live there first. That's how he's managed to survive this long. He's organised and is hard to remove as a major power because he's both physically organised his assets, but also has socially organised the people around him. It's all very well to have the resources, but are you resourceful? I think part of what makes Apocalypse, rather than purely disaster media, so popular and so anxiety-inducing is the slow decay of the world. I love seeing areas that are regrowing, full of plants as nature reclaims them, but often there's more of a focus on deserts, wastelands, and grim grey cityscapes. Zombie movies and games are especially good at this one, because the dying world creeps up slowly, and there's not much you can do about it. The threat is obvious, but it's so slow that you can always keep just ahead of it. But there's an inevitability about zombies that I find frightening. You're always outnumbered. You need things like food and sleep, where they can outlast you easily, and creep up on you when you collapse from exhaustion, always looking over your shoulder and making sure you don't back yourself into a corner. And, most importantly, there's nobody coming to help. Every living person is dealing with the same threat, and often the threat of other survivors becomes far more salient as people become more desperate and will gladly throw you on the corpse pile. There's a hypothesis in science right now which really unsettles me called the dark forest hypothesis. The infamous Fermi paradox states that it's statistically almost certain that there are aliens out there, and the universe should be teeming with life, so where are they? The dark forest suggests an answer to this. That everyone knows that broadcasting your presence in a dark forest full of predators is suicidally stupid. This has the same feeling as apocalypse movies, where every other survivor is a potential predator, and you're constantly in danger, having to keep quiet and unnoticed as you try to get by lest they find you. How long before our attempts to find other life brings predators to our doorstep, or fellow prey with a defensive first strike just in case we're predators? But there's hope. Hashtag not all survivors are hostile. Sure, they might be wary, but sometimes they could use a friend, or you could pool your resources. Or maybe you find a frightened child and decide to protect her, even if she's going to put you in more danger and use what little resources you have. Apocalypse media is littered with this, from The Last of Us, to the Walking Dead games, to Fallout 3's reversal of using all your resources to find your father. Our apocalypse media is full of hope and finding someone to attach to, someone to love. As I've said in probably every video I've made so far, we're social creatures. We're built to connect, and our primal instincts are not bathed in blood. Now, I love to find a humanizing story to act as a frame of reference when talking about large, complex topics like this, so I think we need to talk about Clementine. Part 4. Growing Pains.
I'm still not bitten. I never was.
In the Walking Dead games, Clementine spends her formative years growing up during a zombie apocalypse, but with clear memories of life before the outbreak. While most of her life will be spent in this changed world, she's old enough to know how it was before. She bounces between group after group, absorbing skills from every person she meets, both out of necessity, but also out of the need for social connection. As a child, she sees how doubling down on bad ideas for the sake of short-term relief never works, and often has to suffer the consequences firsthand. And as we see her grow up over the series, we get to know exactly what kinds of people shape her the most, and the ways she learns to plan, prepare, and survive. You've got to be a builder, not a hoarder. These aren't survival games, but they're very much games about survival. In the first game, Clementine's only 8 years old when the outbreak hits, and is taken in by Lee when he finds her home alone with an undead babysitter. The plan is to deliver her to her parents, and Lee tries as hard as he can to shield Clem from the brunt of this new world and protect her innocence. It doesn't work, but by God he tries. Like the man and boy in the road, we're meant to view Clementine as the hope for the future, as she's an innocent child, curious, and not understanding why people won't work together. That's the thing that always gets me about stories from a kid's perspective. They look at the world more objectively than an adult who's been at this life thing for a while and taught themselves not to see the inconsistencies and unfairness. Kids look at a system that isn't working for them and ask why it isn't working. Or more likely, they say that that's not fair. And often they get told that life's not fair, but whenever I hear that I'm like, yeah, you're right. And it's frustrating. Down the line, we end up having to accept that there's things bigger than ourselves that we can't change, and learn to do the best with what we have. But there's something about the righteous indignation of a kid who says, but why is there a homeless man and an empty house on my street? And, but why can't I bring that abandoned cat home with me? Obviously, kids don't always have the best priorities or sense of consequence. Like, if you let them, they'd stay up all night eating sweets, which would not be good for them. But often it's a good reset to hear what they think about systemic problems, like the whole concept of money. And they'll often tell you whether you ask or not because they want to know how the world works. And when we do things that don't really make sense beyond a custom, like girls being the only ones allowed to have long hair as a mild example, they will point it out because they want to understand. They're innocent, but not in the ways adults sometimes expect. They're often brutally honest and can say something that'll make you stop and go, actually, yeah, why do we do this thing? That's when you have the choice to actually pause and think about the reasons behind your behaviour and how to articulate that, or double down with a, because I said so. And I think we all know which one the kid is going to listen to. That's why children and their innocence are such a strong symbol for hope in the future. They have the potential to be anything and make changes beyond our lifetime. Life's not fair, so try to make it better. Lee gives Clementine every small snippet of happiness he can, from finding her snacks to pushing her on a swing, and giving her crayons and batteries for her walkie-talkie that she once used to talk to her father, to keep that hope alive for her. In the first entry alone, she survives many groups that try to cling to a dwindling normality, not wanting to have to adapt and plan beyond the now. A family farmstead where the eldest member insists that
stuff like that doesn't happen around here, Sean.
A slowly starving group in a motel. Cannibal farmers keeping their victims alive and removing one limb at a time so the meat stays fresh rather than zombifying. A tense RV, a train, a house, a school. It's an endless parade of people, the group hemorrhaging members and replacing them with new desperate people along the road. But in the end, Clementine is left alone. Lee dies from a bite, just as the boy's father succumbs to illness at the end of the road. And depending on your choices, you either watch Lee turn slowly while handcuffed to a radiator, or shoot him in the head yourself, unable to bear seeing him mutate into one of the dreaded walkers. Innocence isn't an option anymore, even though all Lee wanted was to protect this girl. He wants her to be strong, training her with a gun, and safe, cutting her hair to make her less grabbable, and always bargaining with her safety as the priority. But the world has changed too much. She has to change as the world changes around her.
She's a little girl.
And she'll die a little girl if you treat her like one. You gotta consider her a living person. That's it. You're either living or you're not. You ain't little, you ain't a girl, you ain't a boy. You ain't strong or smart. You're alive.
The last option left for Clem is to join up with two stragglers of the known group who become her new family. And the same happens to the boy in the road. Both are picked up by new surrogate parents who will hopefully fare better or survive longer. And while we're left with the somewhat hopeful note of survival for the boy, The Walking Dead has another 3 games worth of damage left for Clementine. The second entry in the series follows her at 11 years old. She's more capable and tougher, and she's treated very differently throughout the game. She's still a child and is viewed as such, needing to take instructions from the adults around her, but she bears the consequences of an adult actor, and she doesn't have the life experience to tell which choices are going to be impactful. Telltale games are infamous for their branching paths and the idea that they're shaped by player choice to the point where they're a genre unto themselves. But Clementine the character doesn't understand which things are going to be significant. When we played as Lee, both him and the player always have that gnawing worry for how your decisions are going to affect Clementine. Are you sheltering her too much? Will this protect her? Traumatize her? Toughen her up? Will it make her more survivable, or will it break her? No matter what you intend, this little kid might draw different lessons from what you're trying to teach her, so Lee has to try and balance what she needs to learn with how she needs to learn it, as well as his own survival needs. But Lee is an adult and has agency, as well as the other adults' trust, and he's looking out to keep Clementine safe and give her a future. But when you're playing as Clementine, it's really murky as to what's actually an important decision. And that's reflected in the game system, because the player's often given choices that don't seem to matter. Whatever you choose rarely, if ever, fixes or diffuses a situation. Sometimes an option that looks like it'll help you stay out of trouble, like helping another kid in the group frozen with anxiety and overwhelm to pick some berries, ends up with someone being thrown off a building. You don't have power, you're a child. This is really frustrating to play, and I didn't like it at all the first time around. But looking back on the game as a whole and as a role-playing experience, it's amazing. And by God is it morbid. You don't understand what effect your actions will have yet. It's deliberately not telegraphed so you can make a measured choice, because Clementine herself can't predict what will have lasting consequences. She has to go by the adults' moods and try and build patterns, and it's fascinating to see her grow while trying to predict unpredictable adults ravaged by hopelessness, numbness, or savagery as the apocalypse drags on. And the adults rely on her so much to fit into small spaces, come up with ideas, counsel them, or slip under the radar, because who would take a little girl as a threat? They both use her as a touchstone for innocence, whilst not really realising that they're all steadily chipping away at hers, and it infuriates me. Like, that's a whole human person! Stop using her for your own reassurance and convenience. That's far too much for a child to carry. Clementine doesn't really get to keep any adult mentor figure long enough to guide her or care for her, so nobody's helped her establish a norm. Every person she meets is damaged in different ways that she's never quite prepared for, always on the back foot. She expects change and death, but she never knows when it's going to happen, or how. So she spends most of her time as a peacekeeper, because she knows she's not strong enough yet to live alone, or overpower an aggressive adult. She tries to learn skills and make practical plans that will help her, and appeal to whoever happens to be the current adult calling the shots, and stay in their good graces by being useful. She can control that. She knows how to make a fire, disinfect wounds, how to check if someone's really dead, but she still needs a group for now. And she's learning how to take advantage of people who underestimate her too.
You should probably think about being nicer to me.
2 is probably the bleakest entry in the series, because Clementine is constantly caught between factors that are too mature for her. She needs people to survive, but people are by far the biggest threat to her, far more than zombies. A zombie's predictable. It's stupid. It's attracted to sound and movement. Destroying the brain damns it for good. Not pleasant, but predictable. She even learns from Lee how to move among them safely, covering herself in walker guts to mask her scent, and moving slowly through them as if she belongs. Humans aren't so easily fooled. Clementine is contrasted with an older teen, Sarah, who's relentlessly sheltered by her father. She's seen as a naive child and has no practical skills for survival. She embodies innocence, and despite being 4 years older than Clementine, she often feels much younger, excited to be her best friend when she joins the group. She's that anxious girl I mentioned earlier, Clementine trying to support her, and due to her naturally nervous temperament, I'm guessing her parents kept her fairly sheltered long before the walkers hit. They love her and protect her as best they can, but again, they don't think of the long term. That's the problem with this kind of short-term thinking. We might choose to keep our children safe and overly sheltered for now, but what about when they're adults? We might ignore climate change now, but what about later? We'll just focus on the world in front of us, But what about when something new and out of your control or frame of reference happens? Will you even know how to adapt? Or will you be one of those people who's stuck in the past, living off well-chewed old stories, afraid of or no longer interested in learning new things, and relying on younger, apocalypse-savvy survivors to make sure your barricade's secure? That's what Sarah reminds me of, an inevitable stagnation. We should keep our children safe and give them the emotional and practical skills to deal with the world at large, and the skills are so much more important than anything physical. You can't just keep them safe. You have to give them agency. You have to give them the ability to survive, even if you make sure they never need it. While it's clear her father considers her condition severe, it's unclear whether Sarah's struggling with an anxiety disorder that isn't being addressed, or has some sort of developmental disorder that requires extra care, or both. But what happens to Sarah if her father's no longer there to look after her? He says she would cease to function if she knew how bad things really were, and he's proven correct later on, but it's a problem he created out of love. He seems to always deny her small, safe opportunities to build her confidence and help out to feel like part of the group. Say, keeping their camp inventoried and bags ready to go, for example, and not liking her fondness for Clementine, because Clem could easily break her innocent bubble. And that doesn't make him want to protect Clem as a young child, clearly in need of a caring father like Sarah has. That makes him want her gone at the first opportunity, for the sake of protecting his own daughter, and to stop Clementine exposing her to the harshness of the world. When she's accepted into the group, she's used as a tool to keep Sarah busy, like a babysitter. And it actually makes Sarah more curious about what to do, because if you tell any kid to stay in their room and not ask questions, there isn't a power in the world that can stop that curiosity. They will find out, one way or another, and it's probably not the way you'd like. On top of that, if Sarah doesn't know the stakes, then how can she possibly make good decisions? No matter what choices you make, Sarah always ends up dead, and always by walkers. Innocence serves as a cage, not a shield. By the end of Game 2, Clementine is caught between two adults. One is a violently unpredictable man, Kenny, largely caught up in his own losses. But Clementine has known him since the outbreak and has a strong attachment to him. She was there when his wife died, when his son died, and she saw him break over and over. The main philosophy he represented in the first game was family, and though he often ran his mouth and talked a big game, he never had the stomach to hurt anyone. This time round though, he's too far gone and lashes out so frequently that the other survivors become both afraid of and frustrated with him, regularly cycling through optimism, bad tempers and violent outbursts, and eventually abandon him with a frightened and injured Clementine. He improves a little when a baby, Alvin Jr., or AJ, is born into the group. Kenny's determined to become a father figure to him and fix the mistakes he made with his own lost son, also named for his father. There's this repeating idea of legacy, of survival, of putting your faith for the future in your children. Over and over again in apocalypse media, a child becomes a vessel for hope. The baby becomes the center of his world to the point where he refuses to consider any other plans than his own, deciding that he knows what's best and that only he can save this child. He needs to be AJ's savior. He needs this kid to give him a reason to keep going. He wants that familiar identity of father. It's the last thread of hope he has. And he starts treating the rest of the group as obstacles, even turning on Clementine if she agrees with other people and regarding her as a traitor. The other adult left with Clementine at the game's end is an aloof woman, Jane, who's taken Clem under her wing and taught her useful survival skills while giving her positive feedback. She doesn't like groups, and tries to abandon this one too, but she comes back for Clementine's sake, worried about her. Just like Kenny, Jane's partially viewing Clementine as a replacement child to pin her hopes onto, attaching to her as a more capable child to replace her deceased younger sister, who was much more like Sarah. But she deliberately picks fights with and riles up Kenny in order to get the group to exile him, knowing that the group will eventually blow apart thanks to his control issues, so better sooner than later, right? While she's correct, she ends up doing a significant amount of damage anyway in the name of protection, same as Kenny. Provoking outbursts doesn't help anyone. She keeps trying to gently wedge Clementine and Kenny apart by pointing out to Clementine that even though Clem loves him and cares about him, Kenny's just not a safe person to be around, and she's going to get seriously hurt.
Seen that look before.
Son of a bitch!
I've seen it too. A few times.
Then you know what's about to happen.
And while I could go further into this, it's kind of off topic. And besides, Ian Danskin of Innuendo Studios has made a brilliant video on Kenny's role as an abusive stepfather figure in Season 2, which I highly recommend, so I'll link that in the description. When the rest of the group has had enough of him, only Kenny and Jane are left for an injured Clementine. Jane deliberately lies about the safety of the baby, picking at Kenny's sensitivity to child harm and death in an effort to make him snap. She wants to finally get Clementine away from him, but she also very much wants a justified reason to hurt him. She hates the guy, and is more than willing to leave the worst parts of his life against him, quite literally digging into old wounds as she tears into his empty eye socket. She's had enough, he's had enough. Clementine can try and get between them, be the peaceful mediator she's tried to be all throughout the game, but in the end, it's up to her which of them gets to live. This is the one choice Clementine gets with clear, immediate consequence. And it's the key to her and someone else's survival. Both are manipulative. Both believe they can care for the children watching them fight. There is another option though. You can just walk away. Whichever adult survives, you can leave them to rot in their own mess and take the baby from them too. Has Clementine learned enough to survive and care for a baby? Is she going to put her hope in a child of the future, despite still being a child herself? She's been forced to grow up far too quickly, but the ending question the game is asking you is, can you survive? What kind of future do you think is best for Clementine? Morally speaking, going it alone is technically likely to be the quote-unquote best option, but I remind you here that Clementine is 11 years old. To survive is to take risks, and it's up to you which character you take that risk on. Kenny, Jane, or Clementine herself. Morality stops being that much of a factor when it's literal life and death. And most importantly, do you think it's better for Clem to be given this choice and the skills to back it up, or should she remain innocent, even if it kills her? Part 5. Through the Other Side.
People aren't just people, they are people surrounded by circumstances.
The thing that really gets me about Clementine's horrible journey through the whole series is that it's a story of hope and of what it is to be human when things look bleak and you don't have power. Despite all of the loss and blood and betrayal, there's no world where she abandons the baby. Even when she calls it quits with the adults and decides she's better off looking out for herself, she never loses faith in herself and takes AJ away from the people that hurt her in the name of a better future. But even when you do stick with Kenny or Jane, Clem inevitably ends up raising AJ by herself, and she has to do the best with what she has. And by the end of the series, she does find a permanent home filled with other kids. There's a quote from Witches Abroad by Terry Pratchett that I often think about that goes like this.
Listen, happy endings is fine if they turn out happy, said Granny, glaring at the sky, but you can't make 'em for other people. Like the only way you could make a happy marriage is by cutting their heads off as soon as they say I do, yes? You can't make happiness.
And it's true. It's not about the happy ending, if you can even call it an ending. You can't go around deciding that your kids will have a happy ending, or that their life will be free of trouble. But you can give them a happy beginning, and you can give them what they need to build their own happy ending, if they want it. And that is immeasurably more powerful. To give someone the skills to survive in this world, and let them screw it up if they want to. Sure, the world might have ended, but let them do what humans do best. Give them a happy beginning so that they can grow, learn, build, and care for each other just as fiercely as you care for them. And if that's the outcome of your apocalypse, at least on the small, human scale, I think that's something to be proud of. That's a reason for hope. Humans are pretty damn survivable. We can recover from a lot of terrible things, be they natural disasters or politically driven problems. It's never easy, but we're still here. And it often feels like the world is ending in 20 different directions at once. But honestly, I think we'll be alright. As humans, we adapt, we invent, we look out for each other, and we survive. And that involves being aware of and working to solve what problems you can. I don't think I'm going to be one of the people who's going to make a massive difference in the world, but I can make a difference to the people around me, and that's enough. I can make someone's day a bit easier with a cup of tea, a brief chat, or just nodding to a neighbour. I think that kind of thing adds up. And people have become far more aware of how much of a difference seeing another friendly human face makes after COVID-19 lockdowns. No man is an island. But Clementine, and all children in apocalypse stories, are going to lose something. The next generation won't go through formal education, or know how to use a computer, or learn about space. In a few generations, things will be lost, and they'll be rediscovered and relearned from the resources we leave behind today. That's why I talked about Dark Ages. Things like society, culture, borders, laws, authority, money, and even the lives we live are stories we tell ourselves because it makes the world make sense. We live in a web of stories, and that means we can change the narrative sometimes. But also, that means like all stories, they end sooner or later. And if it was a good story, or maybe a story that made enough money at the box office, it gets a sequel, a beloved reboot, or a complete reimagining a few decades down the line. And that's okay. It can be rediscovered by a new audience who get to fall in love with it for the first time. It's not about despair, but more about how this world is not fixed. The illusion of permanence can make us grieve when things change or are lost. So I guess the point of this video is how we should make sure we're building a tomorrow you're proud of today. It doesn't matter if you don't have any special skills. You don't have to be a doctor or a skilled huntress who can shoot a rabbit dead with a bow before it can blink. Just like the past and present, the future has disabled people too. We found evidence of the disabled being cared for even before the Anthropocene epoch, from humans and our cousins like Neanderthals, who embraced healthcare practices and cared for their sick and injured, and even had a developed midwifery system. If your apocalypse story is a thinly veiled attempt at eugenics, then I'm afraid you're sorely lacking in empathy and should probably do some serious self-reflection. Disabled people have always had a place in their communities, and they always should. You are a person, and interacting with other people changes that person, even if only for the 5 minutes they talk to you, for better or worse. You have the power to affect things, even if it's only in a small way. 1,000 small positive changes add up, and even if they didn't, then isn't it worth it to change someone's day? Even if we do end up getting stuck in a boiling soup of an earth, there's probably still going to be people around, and people will do what people always have. They try and make things better for themselves, and usually, even if only by extension, each other. Most of the characters we see in these apocalypse narratives are just some guy. Not particularly important, just a guy who worked in an office, or a school teacher, or a courier, or a nurse. But we care about seeing them survive because of who they are. Because if an apocalypse happens, every person in the world is going to be affected. And that transcends every colour, creed, and ability level, and we're all going to have to rely on each other. So, do what you can with what you have, and make it mean something.
A future is not given to you. It is something you must take for yourself.